This is discussion number 5 of World History, Chapter 1, Renaissance and Reformation. The title of this discussion is The English Reformation. Now we're going to move on to the Protestant Reformation in England. Now this one takes a much different turn because there was a lot of politics involved as kings and queens started taking turns on the throne. Now the king that we need to start with was Henry VIII. Now Henry VIII was very famous mainly because he had 6 wives. Now the first wife that he married was a Catholic from what we would call Spain. And she had a kid and it was a girl. And Henry wanted a boy. So since he wasn't getting a boy, he decided that he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon and wanted to then marry a lady that looked pretty cute that was hanging around in the court, and so married her. Catholic Church teaching does not allow divorce. And so when Henry VIII said, I don't want to be married to this woman anymore, the Catholic Church said, tough, you're stuck with her. So what Henry VIII decided to do was to say that we are no longer going to listen to the Roman Catholic Church in Rome. We are going to have our own church in England. And he created what we now call the Anglican Church, and he put up a new guy to be in charge by the name of Thomas Cranmer to annul the marriage so that he could get married to whom he wanted to. Now, since the Pope was no longer in charge, he had the law passed called the Law of Supremacy to declare himself the head of the Church of England instead of having to answer to the Pope. Now, one of the things I want to make sure you understand when we talk about this, though, is that while he set himself up to be the head of the Anglican Church, he was not necessarily changing the doctrines of the church. He still had his church teaching much of the beliefs of the Catholic Church. Now, Henry VIII went through 6 wives, and then he died. He did get one son out of those 6 wives. His name was Henry VI. Now, when he ascended to the throne, he was pretty much a kid, and he was sickly, didn't last very long, but he did have the idea of Protestant ideas, and he tried to add some of them to the Catholic Church. But when he died, all he had left was sisters. Now, that first queen, you remember the Catholic one? Her name was Mary, and she obviously had some personal issues with the idea that the Catholic Church was disposed of, and that allowed them to dispose of her mother. And so she was highly Catholic, and she did everything she could in order to make everyone else Catholic. Changed the Anglican Church doctrines to Catholic, essentially did everything she could to discourage anyone from being Protestant, including killing people, which is how she got her nickname, Bloody Mary. Now, Mary eventually dies, and so another sister comes to the throne by the name of Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth was daughter of a Protestant queen, and while she did allow a lot of the Catholic rituals to continue to exist in the Anglican Church, she did institute the catechisms and the doctrines to make sure that people were being taught Protestant doctrines instead of the Catholic doctrines, which required a higher dependency on church leadership. So, as you are a Roman Catholic and you're taking a look at what's going on in the world of Catholicism, you're realizing that people are leaving. This is not exactly what people wanted to see or hear or do. So the Catholic Church starts to take a little bit of time to introspect and say, is there something that we have screwed up? They instituted the Council of Trent, which, most councils and meetings last a week, 2 weeks. The Council of Trent lasted 20 years as there was an examination of what actually needed to be fixed about Catholicism. What came out of that meeting was a reiteration and a cognification of what actually Catholicism should be teaching. First of all, salvation through faith in the church and your good works. They also said that the Bible was not the only source of religious truth, that the Pope could also share religious truth. They also created schools to make sure that the clergy, these priests that were preaching in the local towns, taught appropriate and accurate Catholic doctrine and weren't just kind of making things up as they went. Some other things that came out of that was that they instituted the Inquisition. Essentially, a Catholic investigator would come to your town and saying, is anyone teaching anything that they shouldn't? Is anyone saying anything that they shouldn't? They would use secret testimony. They would torture people until they confessed that they were teaching contrary doctrine. They also created the index of prohibited books. If you were found reading the book or in possession of the book, the Catholic Church reserved the right to kill you, in addition to burning your books. So making sure that only their message was going out and not having the Protestant doctrines in conflict with that. In addition, during this time period, we run into a guy by the name of Inigo Loyola. A lot of times his name is pronounced Ignatius, but this guy had a vision who dedicated himself to the proper teaching of Catholics with moral discipline and absolute obedience to the Church. Now, the Jesuits, which is the name of his group, interpreted to be the Society of Jesus, has founded universities all over the world. We have several of them in the United States. Notre Dame, Boston College, Georgetown are all universities that were founded by the Jesuits here in the United States. Obviously, we got to wait for them to find the United States, and that's going to come later, but just to kind of have a little connection for you. So anyway, Ignatius Loyola of Spain founded the Jesuits. This is the end of discussion number 5, the English Reformation.